on the side.
All right, so here we are today. It's January 22nd, 22. I'm here with Otavio Santana, and we're here to discuss about software craftsmanship. You know, one of our main focuses on this conversation is more geared to the freelance developers that are working contracts on platforms like Upwork or Freelancer, and you're cutting your teeth and you're coming into your first full scale application that you're about to develop for a client, or maybe the scale is a little bit larger. How do you go about choosing the right platforms, the right frameworks, deployment architectures? So that's going to be the nature of what we're talking about here. And
Oh.
Tavi, if you would like to introduce yourself, let people know where you come from.
Okay, okay. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm glad to be here. My name is Otavio Santana. I'm from Brazil, but right now I'm living in Portugal. I'm the guy who loves what I'm doing here with software engineer. I'm graduated as computer engineer and then do service specialization and also worked in amazing open source projects. I participated in Java, as Java executive member, expert group, and expert leader. Basically, I have been working Java since Java 8. I also member of Eclipse Foundation, Apache Foundation as committer, and member of Jakarta EE. I'm CNCF, Linux Foundation Finance member as well. And basically, I enjoy to use my free time to learn about software and help everybody who wants to improve their career with open source.
All right. So when you were newer in development towards the beginning of your career, and you're having to take on some senior level responsibilities, or really starting to make your first architecture choices and design choices, how did you go about like knowing which path to take?
I Last month I read an amazing book by Simon Sinek that say start with why. So basically, my first recommendation is understand exactly what you're doing here as architect or the senior engineer. Because if you are doing something blind, the software will be terrible. We learned in the past that with agile methodology, that you need to be tight between technology and business, right? Then we moved to DDD to create a language that's closer to the business itself.
Mm-hmm.
The main point to us as senior principal, distinguished staff engineer is first understand the why and then go to how. Okay. I have several methodologies to make this easier. For example, I love to use C4 model. I don't
Okay.
know if you are familiar with
No,
C4 model.
if you can, yeah, go ahead and explain that.
Yeah, basically a C4 model, you can think about a Google map for your architecture, right? Because in
Mm-hmm.
the Google Maps, I have zoom in and zoom out. So start by country, then city, and then house, something like that.
Okay.
With C4 model, we have the C1, that is the highest level, where that is the business perspective. So the first C is context. Then we go to the components where I have more details, how the integration works, this kind of thing. Sorry, context, then containers, the integration, component, and the last one is code. So basically, we need to understand it first with the why. How?
Mm-hmm.
Understand the context. As soon I understood the context, I'm able to take the better decision based on that context.
Okay, that
I
makes
have
good
an
sense.
article here, yes, so you can
Mm.
share to the audience. And the whole idea here is to okay, understand what you're doing and then move forward to get more details.
Okay. All right, let me get this article over here for them.
Okay, thank you. I guess the biggest issue that we usually have around Uh, Architecture decision is okay. Let's use microservice. And then when you asked why, nobody knows. Nobody understands why they choose,
Hmm.
for example, microservice.
Hmm.
And that's terrible to us, right? So we need to understand exactly what you're doing and why we decided to choose that.
Yeah, I see that a lot of times that because people are, let's say they're Angular or React developers, or they use Java or JavaScript on the back end, they tend to use it like a hammer, and everything is a nail, and that's their hammer. Versus
Yes.
choosing the right, not only just the right framework, but even choosing the right language, because different languages have different performance capabilities depending on the nature of the work that you're doing, and and I've noticed on a lot of larger applications that I've worked on, you'll see a blended environment where they might have Python to do the data analytics part, and that's plugging into a Java Spring Boot backend and all that has their REST API, and then the front end might be Angular or React or something like that. But they pick those components because those components best served the business needs, not so much. Well, that's just the only as a developer, that's what I know how to do. So that's the framework I'm going to use for this particular client. You know, so if you were working as say a contractor, let's say a single man show, right? And you're on Upwork, and let's say a client approaches you, they want you to develop a white label solution. How would you go about engaging the client to understand what is the context and what is the why?
Discussion, and incremental way.
Okay.
Basically, the biggest mistake that I saw in my whole career was when I decided to spend 1 month, 2 months, and then deliver the code. That's a terrible idea. Don't do that, please. Again, don't do that. If you're able to deliver your codes in the first week, do it. If you're able to deliver your code in the first day, do it. So as much code is on production, is a better to your feedback, is
Mm-hmm.
better to your client understand what you're doing, and
Mm-hmm.
most of all, is the right way to put the software in the right path or
Mm-hmm.
the right direction.
Okay.
My advice to you is incremental way following.
Okay, so if we were to follow that practice, right? How small of a component should be delivered for the client to view? Like, if you were building this and let's say you finished just the login, right? And that's all that was there. Would you release that to the client, or would you wait until you had a different feature? Or would you release every single small feature as you're going along and make it available to the client?
If I'm alone, I'm trying to deliver to go to the piece that makes sense to the client perspective. Okay?
Okay.
Because if you explain to my client, okay, I'm gonna use I release this version, this one gonna use Java 11.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have any idea about what does Java 17 means, right? Because usually they are
Mm-hmm.
not a technical person.
Yeah.
Um, in this case, I try to move as soon as possible in production, and
Mm-hmm.
then when I have a good release, a good feature,
Mm-hmm.
I communicate the client.
Okay. So let me give you a little bit more concrete example so we can kind of really dig down, because I want to give some kind of as close to concrete without providing a specific, like we're not going to talk Angular or Java or something exact how we would do it. But so let's say that the particular application you're developing is for, let's say, a security company, right? And
Okay.
the features that they want is, let's say, they want the a timed clock, where employees can clock in, clock out. They want to be able to, like, GPS track, let's say, the security guard as he makes his rounds, right? I say those are the two primary features that they wanted to have in the application. But we know, like, all right, or at least I know when I hear those things, like, all right, so if we have an employee, then we have to have a way to manage the employees, right? There's all these, like, collateral features that have
Yes,
to
exactly.
exist and all. So
Or
I can't give
maybe
them the timesheet without giving them first, let's say, a way to input or create the employees, right, in the system.
Or
So,
maybe they already have another system that has the whole user, and then you need to think about integration between them,
okay.
for example. And you need to understand also if there's somebody else who gonna guide or who will maintain this application.
Mm-hmm.
Because this matter to the client, right? For example, okay, I have a factory, but I don't want to maintain or keep this operation.
Mm-hmm.
It might be a wise decision to go to a PaaS or platform as a service.
Okay.
However, if I already have an IT team on that factory, let's check what they already know to move my technology closer to they know.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, it'll be easier today to handle. For example, if they are they usually use Java with MySQL, and
Mm-hmm.
it makes sense to use Java with MySQL. Okay, go ahead with that direction.
Okay, yeah, to prevent the on staff or the staff they have on from having to retrain into another technology is what you're saying, right?
Yes, especially
Mm-hmm.
because the operation team, for example, if each system decide to go to a so far away direction, one go to one goes to Python, another one goes to Java, another one goes to PHP, one goes to MongoDB, another one MariaDB, Cassandra.
Mm-hmm.
It would be a nightmare to keep and maintain the whole system. For example, what happens when something goes down,
Mm-hmm.
when something is wrong? You need to have at least six experts, right?
Mm-hmm.
One
One,
for
yeah, for
each
each one.
technology where decide to use. Trust me, sometimes the people decide to go to a new language because it's so hipster, so cool, and do not think about okay, I need to maintain that. It's not a quickly run. It's more like a marathon. And
Mm-hmm.
what's going on next when you decide to use a newest feature, a newest language, a newest database?
Mm-hmm.
And nobody have no idea, or nobody has no idea how can we handle with that in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we got a comment here from Eurus on LinkedIn. He says a list of requirements to be implemented, sorted by importance, needs to be created. That is why discovering and triage meetings are important to plan accordingly. You know, that's totally on point right there. It
Yes.
definitely. I mean, that's one of the things I wanted to really stress was that the concept is even if you're a freelance developer or you're working on a project by yourself, don't skip the meetings, don't skip the planning, the documentation, like use the C4 plan to come up with that high level view and then scale it down so that both you and the client really understand the scope of the work, the scope of the project, and agree on requirements and all. Because oftentimes, the client's going to be like, I want this, this, and this. And you're like, okay, I can deliver those things. And you try and just launch into like delivering those things because, as a contractor, they want it done yesterday. Like, okay, how long is this going to take? They're always rushed about time. And in some way too, we have to figure out how we're going to stress to the client that good software takes time. It's not going to just happen overnight. I could throw some code together and deliver a feature to you, but is it, like you said, is it maintainable? Is it, is somebody else going to be able to come along behind my code and read it and understand what it is? Because I didn't take the time to properly plan how these things have to come together, in the right frameworks and stuff. So how would you say that we could best to engage the client and get them to understand that the process needs to be a little bit slower, that we need to go into this with a little bit more preparation and planning? How would you tackle that?
uh, Conversation, they need to understand that software is an expensive area, and we need to talk to go to the right direction. As
Mm-hmm.
soon we understand what everybody should do, I love to do the incremental way. So
Mm-hmm.
baby steps, small delivery to receive feedbacks, to improve, to
Mm-hmm.
see, to fail fast. right? Because fail fast matter to us and to the client itself, because sometimes
Mhm.
the client has an amazing idea, however, it does not make sense in the real world.
Mhm.
It happened to me a couple times. For example, when I was in Salvador, like 8 years ago, I had a freelancer
Mhm.
about a investment company, a factory investment, and they decided to create identification by eye
Mhm.
about the clothes and also some identification by QR code.
Mhm.
The idea was amazing. We created basically one ID by QR code to each clothes to make sure that we have the exact idea of the whole process of the clothes.
Mhm.
That sounds an amazing idea, right?
Mhm.
But in the real world, it doesn't make sense because the there are some things that must be done in China. You're
Mhm.
not able to track that. And another piece of the process is on Italy and then mixed together and put together in Brazil. So
Mhm.
the idea was amazing. However, in the real world, it's not possible to do
Mhm.
because it doesn't make sense to track people from China, especially because it's not legal to check what another contractor is doing.
Mhm.
When we did the first step, they they were able to see that was a terrible idea.
Yeah, so they were able to. That's that fail fast part. They were able to
Yes,
realize.
fail fast part.
Mhm.
That's why
Yeah.
I love the idea of incremental
Mhm.
way. Agile methodologies for win.
Mhm.
I don't
Okay.
like Scrum much. I prefer Kanban because I
Yeah.
can, okay, a small release, a small deploy, a small
Mhm.
feedback, and move forward.
Yeah, I kind of, for me personally, I like a blended approach. I tend to use Kanban and Scrum together. Kanban, I think, works really good to communicate the current status of the
Hmm.
project and all. Whereas in Scrum, I like to use it more for how do we manage the team? How do we get the team to communicate effectively about the work to be done? Whereas in the Kanban is a good way to show the current status and all, and the stakeholders or anybody over us can easily look and see. They don't have to ask me, well, where's this feature at? Well, it's in development, it's in testing, it's in, wherever it's at, they can see exactly where that particular feature is at, so definitely I like the blended approach. All right, so here's another, hopefully this will be a little trickier question for you here. All right, so on one of the recent projects I was working on, and I had to come to this moment where, all right, so the code needed a lot of refactoring to loosely couple it, right? It needed to be refactored before certain features could be released. There was a high technical debt that had been incurred by bad development previous, right? And but the stakeholders now have obligations to the investors to deliver, right, at a certain time. Things from marketing had to be done by a certain time, and so the stakeholders are coming at the team, and they're like, we don't care about the quality of the code and how it looks. What we care about is this feature is done by this date, because this event's happening and we need this feature done by that event. And we want you to just patch it, push it out, get it to done. We don't care about fixing anything, right? Just do the best you can to push it out there, right? Because they're saying this is right for the business, but you as a professional developer are then faced with, there's what's right in development to do, right? So how would you tackle that particular situation?
Yeah. First, we need to understand that the code is not the end itself. It's a
Mm-hmm.
mean to the end, right? And we need to analyze, understand what's going on, because for sure we're not able to have factory to make the code the most perfect code in the world
Mm-hmm.
because it spend time and to stakeholder that mean money, especially when you talk about time to market.
Mm-hmm.
I try to do the halfway where, okay, I need to deliver value to the business and decrease the complexity of refactoring to move that step,
Mhm.
but they need to understand that as soon as I deliver this version, I will have factor more.
Mhm.
But it's impossible to say, hey, client, you know what? I will stop 1 month to deliver a value to your product to refactor the code.
Mhm.
It's not a goal. It's impossible,
Mhm.
right? It don't make sense to Netflix say, okay, guys, it will we will return soon. So
Mhm.
you're not able to deliver movies because the engineer team is refactoring the code.
Mhm.
It's not gonna happen. As a client, I don't care. As a stakeholder, I don't care as well.
Mhm.
But if you go the halfway, I mean, understand, refactoring, delivery. Understand, refactoring, delivery, put more codes, put more tests, and
Mhm.
make sure that the new code has no technical debt.
Mhm.
And every time that you touch in the old code, you make it better.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I had this situation as distinguished engineer that we're working right now,
Mhm.
and then I make a deal. So I'm working several open source projects that include the Horosec. That's a
Mhm.
security open source product that do the SAST. So if you want to know more, let's share the link here.
Okay.
Horosec.io.
Yeah.
Basically, it's a security tool of that does the SAST, static analytical to security to check it out the vulnerability of your code. So by the
Mhm.
way, if you don't have any tools to make it happen, please use Horusec. And we had a couple of technical debits that include tests.
Mhm. Okay.
We made a deal to deliver a version, and after this version, we stopped to 2 weeks to put a couple of test codes.
Okay.
Based on that, it was much easier uh, to put more features in the product, and then
Mhm.
it makes the stakeholder happy.
Mhm.
My device is analyze, understand, negotiate, and explain then the why. So I want to have factor that to make more easier to bring more value to you.
Mhm. Now we got so yours come made two more comments. One is when we were talking about different methodologies and all. Yours made a comment about methodologies and architecture patterns must be adjusted to every project's need, which is true. And then he also said when we were talking about the business value over, let's say, necessarily doing the right thing in the code and refactoring. He said it's sad but true. Business wins. As IT professionals, we should put on the table the pros and cons, but at the end, money will make the decision. Which,
Unfortunately, that's true.
yes,
Because
it.
we are
Hmm.
working to money. They don't bring us money because they like us.
Hmm.
They need us to a professional service.
Hmm.
And if there is no value to them, why
Hmm.
they should pay to you money?
And
And
I've
that's a
noticed
good discussion.
there's a new model that I've noticed that's kind of been popping up that I've noticed. A lot of consultancies are doing like the talent as a service, and also they have pre vetted developers that they know are good developers, and now they offer their talents as a service. And then you basically can piecemeal it out. You want somebody to do the architecture work, you can hire an architect for a week or two, and then you can hire the developer to deliver a specific feature, or you can pay the consultancy to do the whole particular project, so you can piecemeal it or that. What do you think the impacts of this kind of like talent as a service is going to be? You know. Um,
Oh, it's new service is coming. It will bring more revolution to our area. I
mm-hmm,
don't believe that the programmer engineer will end soon.
mm-hmm,
They still need us, but to more complex thing, especially to bring value to the client.
mm-hmm,
In the past, we did not have ID. And if you go to the whole history, they discussed about, okay, it's gonna with the IDE, it will decrease the number of developers.
Hmm.
Indeed, that's not true, right? It makes us faster to deliver code,
Yeah.
and it brings more opportunity to create even more software.
Well,
It's
I
not to
was getting more
decrease.
at to the point of like, so what they're doing is not necessarily, it's not a software writing software for them, but it's an individual developer that they're contracting out, but as a service, so to say. Um, but what do you think the impact going to be is if you're a developer and you're coming in to just write a single feature, right? And you don't have the big picture or whatever. They're just like, hey, make this particular feature, write it in this language, and all. What do you think the impact to the overall scale of the project is going to be if they continue just to hire
Mm,
a developer here, versus actually having a dedicated staff? You know.
uh, I believe I'm from open source. It's a
Mm-hmm.
really normal in the Java world and Apache Foundation world. So we have a huge bunch of documentation. The whole decision uh, in somehow in a piece of documentation by emails, architecture decision records, so ADR, and this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't believe the outsourcing or any kind of service will decrease the quality of software as well. For example, in Brazil, we have several banks that put 1,000 people together in one single building,
Mm-hmm.
and with even with that, the quality is bad. It's not good.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the point. The point is how transparency my decision are take.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how efficient is my communication through 1,000 people in different countries?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter. To me, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Um, the main point here to us, in looking in the future, especially right now in the COVID point, is
Mhm.
more about, okay, right now I have people from Brazil, from India, from US, Europe. It doesn't matter. If they can deliver a better code, I don't care.
Mhm.
And it's hard to find. I mean, as a teacher, it's hard to find good students.
Mhm.
It's hard to find people who deliver a very good code, people who decided to study to understand what they are doing and go deeper in the language and the framework.
Mhm.
So it's not gonna decrease the opportunity. The opposite. It will increase the opportunity in several ways.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. But so that would then stress that the initial planning is even more important, and because without a
Yes.
plan that these developers are going to be able to come in and see and understand how their code has to plug into that architecture, without that there, then the code's definitely going to suffer, I would say. But if we have this agreed architecture, we have a plan, we have the design laid out, right? And then yeah, I believe that yeah, it wouldn't matter who wrote the code as long as they could understand the design and the architecture patterns being used,
Yes.
they could plug in with that, especially if they're following, their code to an interface, do all these other good practices. And so that's what I really want to stress even more to a lot of freelance developers is it's critical that we understand design patterns, understand like solid principles and stuff, because we know that we're working on projects that other developers are going to come into at some point in time. They're not going to get an onboarding. They're going to get a 2, 3, maybe a month contract. They're going to come in. They're going to deliver a feature. And if we haven't, let's say, coded to an interface where they can easily understand how their code has to plug into the bigger whole, and all, we are making their jobs harder on us. We're making the product suffer and everything. And also, it's critical that we understand how those things impact the application as a whole, uh, like tight coupling. At one point in time all code was written very tightly coupled, and then history has taught us, and if we don't learn and understand why that was bad, what was the downfalls and the pitfalls of that, we're doomed to repeat it. And that's what I see a lot of times in these contract gigs that I go and do, is that the developers didn't understand the impact of what they were doing. And so then when I come along to try and integrate with their code and all, I have to go then push back and say, hey, there has to be a little bit of refactoring, because this tight coupling won't allow me to, piece my piece into it, or if I do, I'm just going to increase this coupling and all. And then the next person, their code's going to also get tightly coupled. And it just starts this chain of tightly coupled code. So really, breaking the chains of bad practices is my main focus. So out of if you had to suggest where somebody should start in, let's say, learning, should they focus first after they've learned the syntax, right? They know how to program in Java or JavaScript, right? Should they learn first a framework, or do you think they should understand architecture from a high perspective, design patterns, solid principles? Where would you say go next after learning how to write the language?
My advice to you be upskill of the approach and the concept, especially about the IT area.
Okay.
But as young people, I was younger. I remember in my first day in the university.
Mm-hmm.
You probably don't like to hear that. So try half half. So go explore more frameworks,
Mm-hmm.
but understand what's going on behind that. So understand the design patterns, understand the best practice in your code.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a Java developer, understand how does the JVM works
Mm-hmm.
because it's important. So do a next step on your career because everybody know to write a code. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, average code, but a code that everybody is able to understand, it's rare. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
who writes a decent code that everybody able to understand what's going on and to connect with you? It's
Mm-hmm.
hard to find people with that qualification in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely
So,
it. And whenever I've because I teach high schoolers computer science and
no,
programming,
nice.
and so one of the things that I try and stress to them is effective communication. Right? We practice it with a regular spoken. Like, how do we speak more effectively to our other teammates? Right? If we can't talk effectively to somebody to describe an ideal, our code definitely is not going to be able to do it, right? So starting out really understanding effective communication, because it's like when you're writing nice, clean, compact code, right? You only have so many lines to deliver the meaning behind that piece of code, right? So how we name our function or method is critical, right? Comments are good, but I've always believed that the code should be self-explanatory. To the best of its possible nature. There are some concepts that the code itself might not be able to encapsulate, and those things I feel are appropriate to include in comments, right? To describe that which the code cannot describe, right? But the code itself should read to me almost like a novel. I should be able to read one piece and understand, okay, I understand what this piece is doing. And then when I see where it's being used, I can kind of build the story. How do you feel about like looking at code in that word nature?
First, we need to write a good code, right? So we have several books, several articles about clean code. I
Mm-hmm.
love the Rob Martin one, the book
Mm-hmm.
about names, methods, number of parameters in your code. So follow this principle,
Mm-hmm.
but it does not mean that you don't need to write a good documentation, right? So
Mm-hmm.
write a good code and write a good documentation.
Mm-hmm.
Remember in the past, we had an idea that somebody else must write the test for you. Right now, finally, we understood that we must write a good code and at least a decent unit test.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to delegate the unit test to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And it happened with the documentation as well. For sure, right now we have technical writing people who will improve your documentation to make it even better,
Mm-hmm.
but is a co-creation. Therefore, you need to help the TW, the technical writers, to put more context, put more information, to write a better code that's readable to everybody. In the
Mm-hmm.
perfect world, you will write documentation and you write your code, and it will be both to be understandable by a businessman who has no idea how to write a single variable in the code.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if I write e-commerce, they don't have no idea about Java, but they will understand that the class user is about user. The checkout methods is to do the checkout. And
Mm-hmm.
so a credit card is a kind of payment type or a
Mm-hmm.
payment implementation. So even if this businessman has no idea about the code, how to write a decent code, how to write Java, they will have a slight idea about what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, the test is also a decent way to you documentate, do a
Mm-hmm.
documentation to your code. For example, I should not able to
Mm-hmm.
write to buy anything if uh, I don't have money on my
Mm-hmm.
credit card. So I need to write down this test, and my test method should explain exactly what I'm testing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the test itself becomes a form of documentation on its own.
Yes.
Yeah, because it describes the intent. Because you write. That's one thing I have noticed too. Is there's uh, developers that understand like how to write, let's say, a unit test, but they don't understand that sometimes that the unit test is there really we're testing business logic, not so much code itself. The test should be written to satisfy some kind of business requirement and all, or some business rule or something, and then our code is written to fulfill the business need. And it happens to
Yes.
make that test pass, and the passing test says that we have satisfied the business need of the code, not just the code itself being able to actually run and go fetch this
Yes.
particular data. Yeah.
The test must to test mainly the business code, right? Because Java already has tests. Hibernate already has tests,
Mm-hmm.
but your business doesn't. So go ahead and test your code. So
Mm-hmm.
don't worry if you mock another part. So oh my gosh, I won't be able to test Hibernate. Don't worry,
Mm-hmm.
Hibernate already does
Yeah.
have tests. Um, that's my
Yeah.
advice. So explore more unit tests, use more unit tests. That
Mm-hmm.
is the article about the triangle of tests where you spend more time writing unit tests because it tip is faster than the
Mm-hmm.
integration, something
Mm-hmm.
else.
Yeah. I remember too is or let me say this first and then I'll go to this. So one thing is I noticed as a freelance developer coming in a lot of projects is the lack of the documentation. Like this, the idea of a
Yeah.
README file in a lot of these contract things, like that would explain like how to get up the, set up the environment or even like, what different things are doing, those are almost non-existent in these freelance projects, but going to the testing thing is I remember it was a question that was asked that was is doing unit tests, is it the same as end-to-end testing? Like if you've done all the unit tests, do you still need to go and write end-to-end tests? And I remember when the first time I got asked that in an interview, I had to really sit there and think about it. I'm like, man, well, if every piece of the code I've written meets the business requirements and works, is it really the same as testing the entire application or end to end or a particular section end to end? And I was like, well, if each piece was built with unit tests like that, in theory, you wouldn't need to do the end to end test because every piece of the code has been thoroughly tested through. But then it comes back to that communication. We might have developed this piece and it works great. This piece works great, and but does the communication between the pieces work as great? So I was like, well, no, we still need to do end-to-end testing as well because we need to know that all these pieces, when assembled, that the end piece that it's delivering, whatever that may be, right, or whatever process that it's doing, functions as intended by the time we get to the end of this thing, you know. And I think of it like kind of like the telephone game, you know, like I might come and
Yes.
whisper like, hey, I like cupcakes, and by the time it gets to the end of the thing, it doesn't say I love cupcakes anymore. It's something completely different, you know. So, how do you feel about like that question? If you were asked that, does individual unit tests replace the need for end-to-end testing?
No, no way. I still believe in the triangle where the biggest number of tests should be, or at least must be, the unit test one.
Mm-hmm.
Where, for example, I have 2,000 unit tests about my business, where I test step by step, variation of a variation. But
Yeah.
the integration, the end to end, you're able to test with lesser unities because it's more
Mm-hmm.
expensive, because I need to raise up everything to make sure the stats is running. So maybe um, a good path to make sure the integration happens, because in Java there are a couple of things that only happen on real time, on the
Mm-hmm.
execution mode. For example, especially if you decide to run reflection, this kind of thing, it might have return agile hell issues, something like that. So the end-to-end is matter. The integration tests matter to us, but
Mm-hmm.
lesser than unit tests.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was and another thing I've noticed. So, I tended up doing a lot of interviews for different contract positions. So I'm always interviewing all the time. It's like technical interviews, HR interviews, like it's just interviewing all the time, you know, or meeting directly with the CEOs and them asking me like, hey, or, you know, the owner of the app or who's ever contracting. But a lot of these technical interviews, I've noticed there's two typical ways I've seen them conducted, right? I'm going to ask you some questions like, how does a linked list work, right? You know, they ask you those kind of questions like
Oh
there.
yes,
And
yes,
then you
yes.
have the algorithm style test, remove all the duplicates from an array without creating an additional array or something like that, right? And all. And, when I was going through all these style interviews like that, I'm like, man, these to me don't really accurately predict whether or not somebody's a good developer or should they be hired. So on a recent
Yes.
contract, I was in a position where I was interviewing and hiring other developers, and they funneled down these resumes down to a handful of resumes for consideration, right? And and I noticed on these resumes that one person mentioned a lot of technology stacks, and he did mention like he had experience in the domain that the business operates on. So the stakeholders were like, "That's the guy we think we want to hire because he has domain knowledge, right?" And I'm like, "But I think this other developer here has more technical experience because I can explain to him the domain part that he doesn't understand, right?" And he's going
Yeah.
to deliver better code. So I was going through the interviewing, but when I did the interviews, it wasn't like, let me ask you, do you know about a linked list? It wasn't like, hey, do you know this particular algorithm that we might or might not even use in our application, right? To me, that was irrelevant. So these were front end developers, Angular developers I was interviewing. So both interviews I conducted exactly the same. I showed them a UI UX design in Adobe XD, right? And then my very first questions was like, because knowing the Angular framework, if you understand how it works, its biggest thing is breaking the view down into components, right? And that's its biggest thing. And not big components, not entire view components, but the view itself needs to be smaller components, right?
Yes, yes,
And
exactly.
so that was my first question: is how would you break this view into components, right? And even from the very first question, you could tell both developers had a completely different understanding. One understood the Angular framework well and understood, like, hey, this list piece is going to be a component. This top little header piece is going to be another component. He was able to break it down, almost echoed my words to the stakeholders exactly on how I would break down the design. The other guy was a little unsure, he didn't understand how small of a component that would be valuable to make to the rest of the design, because I showed them more than one screen, right? So they could see multiple screens. And So then when I was like, all right, go ahead and code out this Angular list component, right? So I have both developers doing the same list component. The guy that I was telling the stakeholders was the better choice based off of the things that I was seeing in his resume, did it in 15 minutes. No questions asked, just immediately he was going in there, and you could tell he knew exactly how to utilize the framework to its best potential, right? And only writing custom what he needed to, else he leaned on the framework for what it already provided, right? So to me, those are marks of a good developer who understands the framework that he's working with, right? The other developer that had the domain knowledge didn't understand Angular as well. And so an hour later, same exact challenge. One guy 15 minutes, the other guy was an hour later, and he still wasn't done. He was still asking a bunch of questions that didn't really relate to how to build this particular thing as a component. And I gave that as an example to the stakeholders as well. It's like this is the difference because they were there during the interview process, so that I wanted them to see the difference of what it means to hire good developers that understand their framework, how it works. Like you were saying, how does it work behind the scenes? How is, what's the best practices for that framework? One developer understood them well, the other one didn't. And I was like, what would have been the business cost if we hired the other guy that took an hour for every component he had to design versus the guy that could do it in 15 and was writing cleaner code? When we multiply that factor out, what I mean, we're talking 20, 30, 40,000 maybe over the course of a couple of months that we paid this guy extra because of the amount of time it took him. So
In
stressing
I
that framework understanding.
Yes, in IT area right now, we don't have indeed you don't have a good path or a unique path to hire people. We
Mm-hmm,
have no idea yet because IT is so new area, so green area, and we did not find a good methodology to find the right people.
mm-hmm,
For example, in your case, okay, the person is lower than the guy who wrote a better code.
mm-hmm,
But how about soft skill? Because if the person, I'm not saying your case, but let's suppose
mm-hmm,
this person writes an amazing code, a cleaner code, but he's not able to talk with everybody else because he fight with everybody.
okay, yeah,
He's
that is
so
true.
unpolite. He don't care about anything else. He doesn't care about the whole process. Okay,
Mm-hmm,
I just want to do my part, and I don't care about something else. He doesn't want to learn more to go to the next step.
mm-hmm,
And they another person is slower, is not faster.
mm-hmm,
Okay, but he has better soft skill, can communicate, can learn, can share what he
mm-hmm,
learned to on more teams. So you have a unique guy who is a writes an amazing code, but he's not able to work in the group. And you have a guy who is lower
mm-hmm,
but multiplies the knowledge between the team.
mm-hmm.
It's a
Yeah,
tough
there is that
situation.
trade-off. There is that trade-off
Yeah, there's a
between soft
trade-off.
skills and the
If
technical
you
skills.
ask me how to hire a good programmer, my first question will be, how do you define a better programmer? Because I have no idea about it.
Mm-hmm,
I mean, it's not just about soft skill. It's not about harder skill. I mean, look
mm-hmm.
at me. I'm a guy who decided to do IT because I don't like to talk with people.
And then
And
you
right
find
now,
yourself talking to people all the
yeah,
time.
I'm finding myself to talk to people every single time
Mm-hmm,
because people matter. We write code to people, from people, integrate with people.
mm-hmm,
It's hard to define. Okay, let's look only to this piece of code.
mm-hmm,
Sometimes we are looking to a programmer, but at the end, we find a person who can fill up
mm-hmm.
the integration between the business and another coders.
Yeah,
It's happened to me a couple
yeah.
of times.
Florida Blue. I was working with some Scrum Masters and product owners from Florida Blue, and we were going through this like seminar kind of thing together. One of the things they brought to the table, which I liked a lot, and I use it with my students as well, is they had this skill matrix, right? And so the way it worked is they had a list of all the skills, soft skills and hard skills that they needed for the particular team, right? Not just for an individual, but for the entire team, all the skills that they needed to get the job done, right? And
Yes.
then you had 1 through 4 rating that you could be. So one was you can't do this thing really at all. You're like pretty much a beginner in it. Two was you could do basic things, but you still need guidance on more advanced things. And then the 3 and 4 I found the most interesting though. So they had a 3 was if you rated it with 3, you had expert knowledge, but you are not able to teach it to others. You don't have the necessary people skills to teach that skill to somebody else. And a 4 was you were proficient, but you have the ability to teach it to others. And
Oh,
and so they try to get the 3 in the like in every category amongst all the team members. They try and get at least one person who's a 3 and one person who's a 4 for that particular skill. And then they try and get those two people to work together because the one person has the soft skills able to teach that knowledge to somebody else, but because they're not necessarily expert level, but they know how to use the expert to find the details that they don't know and then pass that knowledge on to the rest of the team. And then every I believe they do it every quarter. You get to pick 1 or 2 skills that you want to try and improve, right? And your manager or the who's ever over the team picks one that they need you to improve on, right? And so you work for that next quarter, trying to move your number one spot over. You know what I'm saying? You know, or going from at least you're trying to go from a 1 to a 2 or 2 to either a 3 or a 4. And it was kind of just interesting that it didn't go just 1, 2, 3, 4 down the line, like 4 being the best. That 3 and 4 had that trade off. So both of them were good, but both of them had, pros and cons. One had obviously more people skills and the other one had more technical knowledge, but we need both on the team. And that was what I feel that it implies. I know we're getting close to time here. We got a couple minutes left. I don't know if any of the viewers, yours or Maximilian, if you have anything that y'all might want to comment on, questions or anything that you might want to
yes. Come
post
on,
up.
bring your question. It's
Yeah.
amazing to talk about software.
Yeah, actually,
Yeah.
I've known Eurus was it's a fun thing. Is Eurus is one of the first developers I ever met in person. I worked. I was in another. He was in the office beside me, and this is before I knew how to write the first line of codes. And yeah, I can't remember the other guy's name that was in there with him. It's him and another developer, and they were in there working. But they actually inspired me. But they don't. I don't think even. I've never even told Eurus, so this might be the first time he's hearing. He inspired me to want to be a programmer because I would go
Oh,
in that
nice.
room and watch what they were doing. And I was like, I know I'm smart enough to be able to do what they're doing. And I like what they're doing. So I want to be in the room with them versus in the room with the marketing people. And
I got it.
and yeah, there was another guy, Adam, who was doing graphic design work, and I was like, man, I can do that as well. I like it, so I did. I did a split path. I can do graphic design work, design 3D models to digital paintings, and I write code. But that job right there, and those people inspire me to pursue those paths and kind of help me, um, you know, see that that's what I wanted to do. So that's what I try and share now is that same passion of like, that learning. It's like when you see something and you can do it, you're like, I want to learn it, and you get that hunger for that knowledge. And I want to feed people's hunger. And if they don't have a hunger, let me inspire it to them, give them that hunger. So
Okay. Yeah, nice. It's
yeah.
nice. Also mention about knowledge, share knowledge. We
Hmm.
also we always talk about scalability of software, right?
Hmm.
And how about scalability of the architecture
Hmm.
and the decision? Nobody mentioned about that, and that's dangerous
Hmm.
because sometimes we decided to still using top down in the architecture decision, and that's terrible. That's a
Hmm.
terrible idea ever. So, in the methodology, we have Agile to do the data integration. We have
Hmm.
Managed 3.0
Hmm.
to break down the silos and also uh, avoid that we have one boss
Hmm.
that take the whole order instead of share the responsibility and the result.
Mm-hmm.
In the architecture, we should move to that way, to that mode, to that direction.
Hmm.
So I believe
Use
that
the wisdom of
architecture,
the team, is what you're saying.
yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It should not have architecture position anymore. Everybody must take the architecture decision.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that must be somebody who need to drive
Mm-hmm.
everybody to the good direction because he has more skill, who has more qualification, more experience.
Mm-hmm.
However, they need to share the knowledge to more people because
Mm-hmm.
at the end they you have vacation, right? They need
Mm-hmm.
to stay at least one day off to relax, to enjoy more the weekend, doing off on Friday, something like
Yeah.
that. And if this person knows everything, it's danger to the company, to himself, because no, he's not able to rest,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not scalability.
Mm-hmm.
As a device, what are you doing here in Zoop Innovation, the company that I'm working right now? It's a Brazilian company who brings service and in technology. They strong believe on, okay, let's make Brazil a pool of technology, bring more open source to the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, we are running 4 open source products. So, AutoSec that I showed, Charlie
Mm-hmm.
CD, um, Beagle, that is 7 driven Y. If you have no idea about 7 driven Y, to simplify, is a JSF
Mm-hmm.
to multiple device. So I have my server with the whole decision.
Mm-hmm.
I have my minimal application in the mobile, in an Android mobile, an iPhone mobile, and the whole decision of the view details goes through the server.
Mm-hmm.
So we send the whole details and it will be serialized in a mobile device.
Mm-hmm.
So one server, multiple device. And the last one, Charles CD. So if you want to know more about those open source products, and basically what we are doing there is scalability of decision architecture. So we have our own tech radar.
Mm-hmm.
So let's share the link here. That maps the whole technology that we're facing that we are using right now. We also have the C4 model that you explained.
Mm-hmm.
We have the documentation. So everybody on the architecture decision. It's not just one people, one person.
Mm-hmm.
It's everybody in the group. It's everybody in the team.
Mm-hmm.
In the whole decision, our record in architecture decision record. Therefore, I'm able to relax to 1 week, one month, and nobody will care about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're just saying teams need to discuss design together. That is the way to involve everybody and learn from each other. We need to speak up. Nobody knows everything. We all make mistakes, and
Yes.
we all started at the same spot, not knowing and the hunger to learn.
Yes, exactly. Good
Hmm.
point, Yuris. And I strongly believe that.
Yeah, it's definitely it's interesting how it's evolved because I remember when I was first learning software development, it's like open source wasn't talked about as much. There wasn't as much community involvement with each other. And then over the last, 10, 11 years or whatever, it's really involved more and more. There's more sharing and stuff like that. And you see more bigger companies now supporting open source and stuff. So that's definitely I use a lot of open source project. I have still have yet, and I feel shameful for saying it, but I've yet to contribute to an open source project code wise. And it's like
No.
not even knowing where to begin sometimes. It's like, how do I, like, I don't know, because I look at some of the works that like some of the stuff that you work on and some other people I know, and it's like, where do you even begin? Like, you
Oh,
know?
that's easy. So start, learn, and use. So the first step to you as a device, choose a product that you love to contribute
Mm-hmm,
or a product that need people to help. For example, I can give you, if you're listening to us, a challenge.
mm-hmm,
Everybody need to have a security code to avoid any kind of nightmare and avoid any kind of vulnerability in your code, right? So how about you help an open source product to avoid any kind of vulnerability in your code? So you
Mm-hmm.
can come here. I'll share the link here. Go to orsac.io,
Mm-hmm.
write down test, write an article about it, give us feedback,
Mm-hmm.
and then contribute to us. The contribution is not just only about uh, code. If you do a presentation about it, if you write
Mm-hmm.
article about it, it's amazing. Okay, and also you can share your experience to contribute it in open source product. So if you want to choose my device, go to orsac.io, test. It has support to several languages, so you can run, download, test, give your feedback, write down an article. If you want, if you have Twitter, share, mention me, and I'm glad to share your article, your presentation, your whatever about
Mm-hmm.
ORSAC or any kind of open source product. So I'm kind of glad to help you. It doesn't matter the open
Mm-hmm.
source product.
Well, I know we're at time here. Natalia, I want to thank you so much, and look
That's
for the
my
next
pleasure.
time that we can hang out. Um, and then, yeah, again, thank you so much. I know you're super busy, always working on all these projects, and I thank you for taking the time out to have this podcast with me.
Oh, that's my pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you to the people that are viewing this or going to view this. Thank you for taking your time to listen to what we have to say. Thank y'all.
Okay, bye
All
bye.
right. Bye.